What's up? I'm AJ and welcome back to Gen Z Garage. In the last episode, I reinstalled the engine back into the car. And in today's episode, we're going to be dealing with brake and suspensions because I want to get my car back on its wheels. Speaking of wheels, look how fancy and nice they look. They're brand new. With the engine back in the car, the engine is now sitting on jack stands. So, I want to get it back on the wheels as quickly as possible as I'm so close to being able to drive it. But before we get started, I'd like to review all of the parts that I'll be installing in this video. The first thing you'll notice are my fantastic looking steering knuckles. These are the original steering knuckles from the Fiero, but they were sent to a machine shop where they were baked in an oven specifically to remove any traces of rust or paint. After they were cooled, we had them ceramic coated with black chassis paint. Next, we ordered a set of brand new sealed wheel hubs. These hubs are made in Taiwan and were ordered from Rock Auto. They were better than the standard China-made sets that were available. To properly install the hubs, we ordered a new set of hex flange bolts, which we had to get from Amazon. They were a set of zinc-coated bolts with a 10.9 strength rating. We only need 3 per side, so we ordered 2 packs of 5. Moving over to the control arms, we had the same treatment done to them as we had done to the steering knuckles. They were baked, stripped, and ceramic coated. We also had a set of brand new TRW rubber bushings installed. We decided to go with new rubber instead of polyurethane because we wanted to improve and restore the ride and handling, but didn't want increased road vibration and feedback. In addition, we also ordered a set of brand new made in America TRW ball joints. They were on closeout, so not only did we get them at a better price, but they are also a higher quality than the cheaper replacements you find today. For brakes, we went with a set of OEM-sized cross-drilled and slotted rotors. The factory rear brakes are decent enough, but cross-drilled and slotted were only $20 more per rotor and will last longer as they're less likely to warp. Coupled with the new rotors, we went with a set of Nugeon zinc and ceramic coated rebuilt OEM GM calipers. These calipers are rebuilt in the United States with the highest quality remanufactured parts. These were not cheap, but this is not an area that you want to skimp. Next, we went with a brand new set of Fiero store brake dust shields. These are ceramic coated and not only help deflect brake dust away from the engine and drive shaft, but they also help guide air towards the rear brake calipers. For the brake lines, we went with a set of brand new Taiwan-made AC Delco brake hoses. These all have the correct rubber anti-abrasion supports and are the proper length. Next, we went with, no, not a set of Harry Potter wands, but hardened inner tie rods from Rodney Dickman Online. But wait, there's more. Moving down below, we start with a set of reconditioned WS6 springs from a low-mileage Arizona 1987 Fiero GT that we purchased from Mike's Fiero Parts. These are stock WS6 spring rates and were primed and painted with flat silver epoxy paint. Next, we have our Monroe Progressive McPherson Strut kit that we ordered from the Fiero store. The kit sells for $295 and comes complete with everything you need to replace your worn-out rear struts, including new spring isolators and pads, strut boots, new strut plates, and of course, new Monroe shocks. These shocks are progressive, so they get tighter as more load is applied, but they resist road vibrations for a more comfortable drive. And last but not least, I bought a set of completely reconditioned OEM Turbofin Fiero wheels from Wheels, Tires, and More off eBay. They were $175 a piece, shipped, but they will pay you to ship back your old wheels for refinishing, $35 a piece, which includes free return shipping. These refinished wheels will make all the difference in the world to help restore the factory appearance. We'll begin our suspension work with the assembly of the rear control arms. I remove the ball joint from the packaging and prepare for the installation. It should include a ball joint, 3 retaining screws and nuts, a Zerk grease fitting, the ball joint to knuckle retaining bolts, and the ball joint dust boot. I start by installing the Zerk grease fitting on the bottom, which is self-tapping and screws in on the underside of the ball joint using an 8mm crescent wrench. Next, the ball joint is installed by pushing it through the underside of the control arm. It is extremely important that you get this right, as the control arm is under enormous tension and installing it on the top will result in failure. Next, I place the bump stop bracket over the top and onto the top of the control arm. I can then begin threading the bolts through the top of the control arm and through the ball joint. With the ceramic coating, it's a little tight, so I use my impact gun to carefully thread them in. With the bolts properly seated, I flip the control arm so that I can install the remaining nuts. I use red Loctite on all 3 bolts. It's important to remember that all suspension bolts should use the red Loctite, as these bolts should never be allowed to break loose since they effectively carry the entire load of the car. I then use my 10mm crescent wrench to get them started, and then use the impact gun on them to fully tighten them down. The fully assembled rear control arm should look like this, with the bolt heads on top and the bolts protruding down to the underside. These bolts are not required to hold the stress of the ball joint, as the ball joint itself does this since it's fed into the control arm eye through the bottom. The bolts are only there to prevent everything from moving. Remember that if there's any confusion as to which side goes where, both the control arm and the individual parts are stamped with either an L or an R as shown, to indicate right or left side application, and they are different. If you still can't remember that, the driver's side is left and the passenger side is right. The subframe itself, as well as the chassis, are also stamped with an L or an R as shown. With the control arms ready to go, I spray the subframe contact areas to ease the installation. With new rubber bushings, the installation area is going to be tight, and white lithium grease helps to ensure a smoother installation. You may still need some persuasion to get the arm into place, so I use a rubber mallet to properly push the control arm into position. Next, I use a set of hardened control arm bolts, washers, and crush nuts that I purchased from the Fiero store. These replace the old, fatigued, and rusting original bolts. Be sure to install the bolts with the heads facing away from the control arm and the crush nut facing inward. The camera unfortunately focused on the protruding wheel axle, but that's okay since it's for good reason. The ABS ring gear that you see installed, which I mentioned in the previous video, need to be removed before you can install everything properly. I had not yet discovered this until much later and had to tear everything back down to this point to remove it. If you're where I am at this point, you need to remove it. With everything in place, I tighten down the control arm bolts using a ratcheting crescent wrench. Next, I begin working on the wheel hub. I coat the surrounding area with anti-seize compound, as in some climates, the hubs will often rust directly into the steering knuckle. I then loosely install the hub to the steering knuckle, starting with brake shield as shown, followed by the wheel hub. The service manual recommends installing the dust shield on top of the wheel hub, and not between the wheel hub and steering knuckle as I have. However, I have chosen to disregard this and place the shield between the knuckle and the hub. In the factory location, the clearance between the brake rotor and the components is exceptionally and unnecessarily tight. The way I've installed it, it gives an additional 1/2 inch of spacing, which allows for better clearance with no fitment or hub sealing issues. I finished by tightening down the hub with the new bolts I purchased online. The hub has a cutout which fits in a deep throw socket, allowing you to access each of the 3 bolts as you turn it. I keep these bolts loose, as I will be tightening them down with Loctite later in the installation. It's important to note that while all new hubs are sealed hubs, the original design called for a rear hub seal to be pressed in as shown. Most of the repair manuals fail to even mention the existence of this hub seal, but I recommend installing it regardless for maximum reliability. There's at least one company on Rock Auto at the time of making this video that still produces this rear hub and bearing seal for just a few dollars, so it's worth installing. I've also added heavy-duty gear grease to the hub end, which, while not entirely necessary, will add as an extra layer to prevent water intrusion into the sealed hub bearing. Next, I set up the other components, starting with the spring pads. The lower spring pad fits snug over the very end of the spring, while the upper spring pad snaps into the restored spring hat above. I use a pair of pliers to properly pull the rubber anchors through the hole. Next, I release the tension on the McPherson strut. I simply use a 10mm crescent wrench and turn it counterclockwise to release it. This only happens once and is done by the manufacturer to make it easier to ship. With that, I can now mate the steering knuckle to the strut assembly. These are installed using two gigantic hardened bolts. One of the bolt slots is elongated to allow for proper camber adjustment in the suspension. I'll tighten these down later with an impact gun to my best assessment, but I'll need to adjust these later. Next, we reinstall the original shock boot and bumper as they were still in really good shape. This slides on first, followed by the larger of the two spring hat washers with the cupped side facing down, and then the rear WS6 spring properly oriented into the strut spring groove. The last pieces to go on is the spring hat retainer, which accepts the new upper strut plate. When installed, the upper strut plate should lay totally flat on the spring hat retainer. Finally, the smaller of the two washers then sits atop the strut plate with the cupped side facing up. I'll remove this for now, but we'll install it later. With everything assembled, the total weight of the steering knuckle, hub, strut, and other parts comes in at over 50 pounds, so my dad helps me lift it up and onto the lower control arm. We first feed the axle into the hub, and then up and over the ball joint dowel. With the strut and knuckle loosely installed, I place a small jack under the control arm and begin jacking the assembly up just enough while I properly align the bolts from the spring retainer into the shock tower. As soon as I position the strut assembly high enough, I can get at least one crush nut on temporarily, so that I can work on getting the other two nuts installed. Remember that for rigidity and added strength, the Fiero uses thick adjustment washers to help spread the tension across the top of the shock tower. I repainted these using VHT bronze wheel paint, which was the same paint I also used for the fuel line adapters on the TBI that I rebuilt. This color is as close as possible to the original zinc coating that came from the factory on these washers. I install each of them one at a time and hand tighten the crush washers, and then tighten them down with a socket. Next, I use the small jack under the control arm again to further compress the springs some more. This is so that the top of the strut will protrude through the strut plate bushing. With the strut shaft visible, I install the smaller of the cupped washers, as I'd mentioned earlier, and then install the large crush washer immediately after. I use an impact socket to tighten this down as much as I can, but at a certain point, the shock will start to spin. Once this happens, I switch to a pair of 10mm and ratcheting crescent wrenches to finish tightening it down. With the assembly on the jack and properly attached to the shock tower, I then install and tighten down the axle nut. Keep in mind that the axle will only come with a new nut, but you'll be expected to reuse the washer that came off the old hub assembly, which I sanded down and repainted. The axle nut should be torqued to 70 foot-pounds and later torqued to 170 foot-pounds when the car is back on the ground. I'll repeat again, since you can see the ABS tone ring still installed, this should have been removed immediately after taking the axle out of the box. I will spare you all of the repeat videos, but I had to undo most of this so I could cut the ring off. With the assembly still on the jack, I now hand tighten the crush nut onto the ball joint retaining bolt that threads it through the steering knuckle clamp. Shown here is a picture of the passenger side, before the axle nut and retaining bolt have been tightened down. When the bolt is properly slotted with the ball joint, it should look like this. It is incredibly important to ensure this is done correctly. Failure to properly thread the bolt into the notch of the ball joint will result in failure such as in this example. Greg R75 from Penix provided these pictures to me in hopes anyone doing this job does it properly. You do not want this to happen while you're on the highway. With that said, I remove each of the 3 wheel hub bolts one at a time, add red Loctite, and then torque them down with my impact gun. And with that, I can release the jack. I've made this video long enough already, and I just want to get the car back on its wheels so I can finally move it around. I go ahead and install the new brake rotor so that I have a proper mounting surface for my refurbished wheels. I put the wheel onto the newly rebuilt strut and knuckle assembly and begin installing the brand new zinc-coated General Motors Acorn lug nuts. Although I still need to do my final torque on the axle nut, I can't help but install the new Fiero store center cap. And with that, the Fiero is finally back on its own four wheels after nearly a year. Stay tuned to part 2 where I install the brakes and tie rods.
Thank you so much for watching. I am super excited because we finally got the car back on its wheels. We still have to get it in alignment and tie rods, however, but you know, it's the first time it's been on its wheels in like at least a year. So that's really cool. Lots of work, hard work and effort put into this car. I'm really excited because this is another step closer to being able to drive it. If you want to see me get it to the point where I can drive it, you should totally subscribe and like this video because then you will be able to see. So thank you so much for watching and I'll see you in the next video.
Before you go, don't forget to sign up for SEMA Action Network at www.semasand.com so you can receive updates on policies affecting the classic car industry. Remember, only you can make a difference in protecting the classic car hobby.
I just realized we can finally get the Halloween and Christmas decorations out of the attic.